I wanted to go over doing flats in Illustrator. So I have a flat that I drew. Size. So ridiculously large. And it doesn't matter that this is a photograph because I'm going to trace them anyway. It also doesn't matter that they're a little bit crooked because I'm going to throw this on its own layer. So I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to lock this layer 1. So we've gone over how to do this before for tracing, but layers are helpful. So now I can't accidentally click on it, and I'm going to grab my pen tool. I just want to focus on this front version for now, so I'm going to make it a bit bigger, and I want to make sure it's kind of straight up and down. So I'm just going to do that. And I want to be able to drag out a ruler for the center of this, because the nice thing with flats is that you don't necessarily have to draw both sides. You can just draw one side or the other if you know the correct way to do it. So we can go to Wind or View, Show Rulers, right? In order to be able to drag out this guide, which doesn't, it hates guides. Maybe guides are off. Why? Why? That's.
You're on the locked layer.
Huh?
Is it because you're on the locked layer?
Ah, thank you so much. I was on a locked layer, yes. So there we go. And my drawing was a little bit crooked anyway, so we can kind of clean that up. It's fine. We are gonna grab the pen tool and start drawing. The key for Illustrator is that in the end we want to make closed shapes that all line up really nicely next to each other, and we want to make closed shapes because otherwise it won't. I'm going to lock the guides too. We want to make closed shapes because otherwise the pattern that we put on these won't like apply properly across the garment. So I am starting from the center. I'm just going to draw 1/2 of this dress. So reviewing my pen tool skills, I'm clicking and dragging to make anchor points with handles. I can make an anchor point with a handle and then click on it. Like right now I couldn't make this corner, but if I click on this and make a corner, then I will have a nice corner there, and I'm going to end in the center here again. Okay, so let's actually give that some stroke and fill. And I'll just give it a random fill for right now. If we wanted to, we could transform this across right now. So let's do it. So right click, transform, reflect is one of the ways to do it. But I'm sorry, I'm remembering another way to do it. The reflect tool is very good. Yes, okay, that's why it's very good. So you can go to right click, transform, reflect, and choose preview to make sure it's flipping the right way, and then hit copy, right? So we'll get a copy of it. and then we can slide it right over so that it touches the anchor point. But a nice way to do that very efficiently is with the reflect tool. So we've never really discussed the reflect tool or the rotate tool because there are other ways to do this. But the reflect tool, if you click on an object, I don't know, maybe the object has to be selected first. If you click on an object, oh, that reflected it weird. I think maybe I'm not employing Alt. If I click on an object and I hold Alt, it gets that little dot dot dot, or it's kind of like a minus symbol next to it. And I click there. Oh, I see what's happening. You can click to place the first point of rotation, and then the second point is like where it makes the axes. But I'm just gonna back out of that tool for a second and start fresh. 'Cause if you just hold Alt and you click on this center anchor point, if we make sure it's flipping vertically on this little panel that comes up, that's important, and we can check. Preview doesn't seem to be working, but if we hit copy, God, I'm sorry, I swear that it worked.
It did work.
You saw it work that one time when I was just experimenting for 1 second. Alt, click this guy, copy. Okay. Oh well, you can always just right click, transform, reflect. I love it when things don't work out. Just make sure to hit copies, or you could copy and paste it front. And right now, although this isn't in the right spot, like horizontally on the x-axis, it is in the right spot vertically in the y-axis to line up from this point to this point. So I can just click and drag it over, and it should line up. Another really fun way to do that is if I start on this anchor points, so I'm on my black selection tool, so I'm not actually going to edit that anchor point, I'm just going to click and drag using it. When I hover over this anchor point, my little mouse turns white, okay, and that's the little symbol that tells you it's lined up perfectly. Now though, if we were to put a pattern on it, there's a chance that it might not line up perfectly, right? Because these are two different shapes, it might be that something happens where the patterns aren't lined up. The best way to address this is to make this a solid shape. And this is where people tend to get confused. So I'm going to make this have no fill. And let me make it even thicker. And actually, before we address how to join those guys together, I'm just going to talk about join in general for a second. So I'm going to zoom in kind of right here. It's beautiful. So if I have these lines, if I select them with my black selection tool, right? Who can tell me the difference between the black selection tool and the white selection tool? Tell me.
The white selection tool is like certain anchor points. The black selection tool just moves.
Exactly. Black one moves the whole shape. Oops, accidentally entered isolation mode. Moves the whole shape. White selection tool can move just one anchor point. When we use join, this function join, this is important. The function join has different attitudes, or kind of different functions, depending on whether you've selected things with the black selection tool or the white selection tool. So with the black selection tool, if I select both of these lines and choose join, it's going to choose one of the sides and draw a line between them, and you don't get control over which side it joins. It does make them into one shape, and your pattern would distribute across it seamlessly, but what's very good practice for flats and for joining shapes is to actually join the anchor points. So if I select this anchor point and this one, right now if I hit join, pretty much the same thing is going to happen. It's going to draw a line between them. If I put them right on top of each other and then join them, they'll become one anchor point, one seamless, beautiful anchor point. I'm going to add some videos on how to do this that other people have written to Moodle. But I'm going to select both of those anchor points. Those guys are selected because they're filled in. These guys, they aren't selected because they're white. I'm going to choose right-click average. And average is going to average out the position of both of these anchor points and make sure that they're exactly on top of each other. You want the average of both the vertical and the horizontal, and they come together. And see how there are right now there are three handles right now because they aren't one anchor point. And even if I hit join right now with the black selection tool, it would like add a little invisible line in between. It would still leave two anchor points there, which is annoying. Sometimes you want things to just become one anchor point. So I can select them with my white selection tool. I'm dragging a box around them in order to select them because I can't select one and then hold shift and select the other anymore. But now if I hit join, there's just one anchor point there, there's just one handle, and I could even select it and convert it to a smoothing point, right? And have a smooth guy. Okay, so how does this apply to our flats? First off, we can notice that there are two anchor points here. They are right on top of each other, and it might be that if I chose join, like, they would work fine. But I like to average things first anyway, so I select them both by dragging a box around them, right-click average, and hit OK, and then right-click join, and now they're one anchor point. And we can do that on the bottom too. So on the bottom, I'm going to make it a little bit more obvious. I'll spread them apart. Okay, so I could hold shift and select one and then the other, or I could drag a box around them with my white selection tool, right-click average, right-click join. And then this guy is giving me a tiny bit of like kind of a butt action is happening here. Like it gets a little bit of a butt crack thing that's going on. And that can end up being more exaggerated depending on how well you drew it. But if I select this, now that I've made it into one anchor point, one of the benefits is that I can make it into one smoothing point that is no longer a corner. Okay. What I would suggest for these flats is that you take advantage of stacking functions of Illustrator, so we don't have to draw shapes that line up perfectly with our flat, with the lines we've already drawn. We can draw shapes that go under shapes that are going to have fill. So, for example, this might have fill of our pattern on it. Maybe our pattern is this gradient. When we go to draw the collar, one of the options is, and we can again just draw half the collar if we like, but one of the options is to, we can draw the outside just like normal. Let me get rid of this fill. Yeah, but now coming inside, we can kind of just go kind of willy-nilly under this. We're going to arrange it so that it's underneath, but this is a nice way of doing flats very easily. So I can give this a fill now if I like, and we can do right-click, arrange, send to back, and now we have part of the collar illustrated. Oh, I didn't need to add this line, this center line. So I can just select that one line and delete it. And then we can, let me try it again with this guy. reflect tool, hold Alt, click on the center point. Yeah, yes, okay, and then copy. So that worked. I don't know why it wasn't working before. I think because I had clicked too many times or something. And I can select both of these anchor points and right-click average, right-click join. We're going to be doing a lot of this in next semester, so this is your first taste of it all. So it's nice to be able to do it. Yeah, are you guys all in my class next semester?
A lot of us have you on Thursday, but Jordan was like late to the party.
Jordan, I would miss you. So.
Oh, don't cry.
Oh my God, yeah, don't cry. So I can just draw. So I'm working in like a really thick line so that you guys can see it, but you wouldn't have to work in this. So I could draw a lot of these details on here first. Probably don't need that center one. And then I can reflect, right? So I can reflect that later. I can reflect this later, but let me get them in the right order. I could make these guys a bit transparent if I liked, which lives under window transparency. And then I would be able to see the detail underneath it. And I could draw those on, right? And then I could transform them all together. Pen tool. I want to make this pen tool smaller. For these lines, I can copy and paste them even, or like some other options. There are some other options. You could drop them. And then I can always grab these guys and this Alt and click the center guideline, and it should flip right over there as long as vertical is selected. Oops, I forgot to hit copy. Let me throw the transparency back up. We're using, so we're using the layers setting, or like the stacking function of this in order to get clean edges, right? We are mirroring stuff. We're trying to make closed shapes. So this guy that I just mirrored, I would probably grab his anchor points, at least one of them, and do average and join. But we can, let me finish it really quick and then we'll bring our pattern onto it. I'm almost there. My favorite way to do skirts is to I like to just make kind of a flat round skirt first, and then add the detail in a bit. So I I can do right click, transform, reflect, and choose copy and slide that right over. Right click, average, okay, right click, join, and then right click, arrange, send to back. Lots of right clicks there. Put that beautiful gradient on that part. So now my favorite way to add fullness to the bottom of a dress, and you could do this anyway, but the end game is to draw the whole outside first. So I don't want to draw any of these fullness lines yet, just like I didn't try to draw these waistband details onto it. I added them after. I'm going to add the fullness lines after as well. So this guy. My favorite way to do that is with the Add Anchor Point tool. And I add a few anchor points along it. Yeah, okay, I clicked slightly off the path. And at this point, we could go kind of asymmetrical even. And then white selection tool, I grab these guys and I rotate them so that they are adding that fullness curve to them. And I don't have to go exactly by my drawing there. This guy is still a corner. I want to convert him to a smoothing point. And then once I like the bottom, I come back in with, and I even just use the line segment tool for this, which is a click and drag action, not a click to place endpoints action. And I draw the fullness lines in there. It's nice to do lines of varying sizes. Okay. Now, how do we put stitches on this? Because we can. And it's not that hard. You don't have to draw every individual stitch like we do if we're drawing them by hand. Let's say that I want to add a stitched hemline to this, to the bottom of this. I'm first going to copy and paste this this section of the garment, and I'll just put it over here for a second. Burp. I just want this bottom line left because I'm going to turn it into my stitch line. So with my white selection tool, I'm going to select all of the other anchor points and hit delete and get rid of the fill. So now it's just a line. We can make this line dashed, which is a very convincing stitch line, the dashed line. So we did touch on stroke. Oh no, I'm getting mixed up. I don't know if you've ever noticed the stroke panel, but it does exist. And sometimes it might not show all of this. So if hide options has been turned on, and then the stroke panel just looks like this guy, so now it's in the center of my screen. Stroke. But when we choose show options, it has a lot more options. You can even put arrowheads onto stuff, but we don't need to do that. But I can check dashed line, and then a good dashed line is like a 2-point dash and a 2-point gap. You can play with it depending. And then what really drives it home as stitches is when we give it this capped capped end to the dashes, right? So it goes from kind of a treasure map feel to stitches all of a sudden. Okay, so now that we've made it dashed, we can move it on top of our dress, and we get a nice hem there really easily. So we could, it seemed, we might need a tiny bit of adjustment there to make it line up perfectly, like this doesn't come all the way to the edge. So I might move that out all the way to the edge. But we don't want it going beyond the edge, that's much worse. And like it might be that we want to hit this, like some of these moments a little bit harder than the bottom hem, but it's up to you. I think it looks pretty good. So yeah, sometimes these things need to be relined up if they're at angles, if the lines are at angles. Let me put the stroke panel back here. We can do that with other lines very easily. If I select this center anchor point, maybe, yeah. If I select the center anchor point for this guy, I can do Command copy and edit, paste in place or whatever, and then I have a tiny little line. And with my eyedropper tool, if I have this line selected and I go to another stitched line, then I can just apply that stitched setting to it very easily. I don't think there would actually be any top stitching there, but just as an example. So I could keep going on this and give it a back and everything. Do you guys have questions up to this point? We're going to talk about putting pattern on it a little bit. Okay. We're going to do this. This is going to be our in-class activity, so I will be here for you while you're making your first flat. Okay, so the easiest way to get your pattern from one file to another, in my experience, is to copy and paste a box that has your pattern in it. So I could choose this one, or I could make a new box that has my pattern in it, or any shape that has a pattern in it. So I copied that. And now I'm pasting it over here, and it does show up in my swatches. Even after I delete my shape, it shows up in my swatches. So I can select this and choose graffiti cheeks. God, that looks terrible with the red. If I want to, I can select something and then go to select same fill color. And that's a good way of selecting everything that has the same fill color in it. That is that. I'm trying to think. This would be very acceptable to me as a flat. I don't normally expect flats to have the pattern filled in them in like the natural way that we're attempting to do back in Photoshop when we warp stuff. There are definitely ways to warp stuff though. So like there are options. If we, yeah, okay. If we did, let me copy this whole dress. Oops. Good. If we filled this and then went, I don't know if Puppet Warp is going to work in this properly. Yeah, Puppet Warp doesn't warp the pattern inside it. As an aside, Puppet Warp does exist because we had just talked about Puppet Warp. It does exist in Illustrator. It's not working for manipulating my pattern right now. I bet that I could figure out how to do that, but come on, get me out of here. I have to have the artwork selected, but then Puppet Warp allows me to place pins all of the artwork and manipulate the artwork in this way. And because it's vectors, like it doesn't get pixelated at all. So this is really fun for character design. Like if you drew a character and digitized it, Vic and I were doing fun stuff. We were moving his characters around on the page after we had digitized them or auto-traced them, I mean. So that's fun, Puppet Warp. I think if we draw a rectangle and we go to Object Expand, if we draw a rectangle with our pattern in it, we can expand to the fill in the stroke. And now, if we get into this, like, this is made of real shapes now. So if I try Puppet Warp now, my guess is that it might work. So select it. Free distort effects. Okay. All right, yeah, and Puppet Warp, now that I went to Object Expand, is working. But so let's do yours though, because Puppet Warp's overly complicated. We draw a rectangle. What is it? Objects.
Effect, distort and transform, and then free distort. And it's like, yeah, I don't know how good it would work for this purpose, but you can just like put 4 points in the rectangle.
There is another
There was an effect.
way to do this called mesh. Oh yeah, warp. But this is like these specific types of warp, which is annoying. Distort and transform. Huh.
That didn't do anything.
Preview isn't checked. It's also not editing the pattern. The pattern is staying the same. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Just because this is normally how far I get with flats in Illustrator. I'm sure there is a way to warp stuff in Illustrator. I'm just having a moment. Because I've done it with grids before. I would have to.
2 degrees in here.
Yeah, it is very cold in here. Huh. Well, that's okay. I didn't know Illustrator could do that, but that's pointless. So, with Puppet Warp, that was the way I figured out how to do it. So if we went to, if we made that rectangle, and Object Expand expands everything into just back to vectors, right? Like if you have a special pattern on it, it makes it back into vectors. So we can do that, and then Puppet Warp is this little pin here, and I can start adding anchors to this, and I could try manipulating kind of the whole shape.
Yes, he's making gaps.
my pattern had gaps, but it is actually, you're right, it is making gaps. So this is not working at all. This is a terrible, terrible idea. I bet that if we brought a JPEG in, it would be easier to manipulate in here. If we got this to a point where we would like it, my end game here was to review clipping warps, or sorry, clipping masks. So if I send this to the back, whatever I have selected, whatever is the topmost layer, I don't know, bam, bam. All right, so my garment top is on front, and we can go to Objects, Clipping Mask, Make, and God, it didn't work at all. Huh. I'm sorry, this ended up grouped, that's why. So now just my center guy is selected. Objects, Clipping Mask, Make. So we can get, there is some distortion on that, but it's also like destroying the flow of the pattern. I think it looks fine, just flat, although my pattern actually does have some seams showing in it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's take a break until like 11:05-ish. Okay?